Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I welcome you to part 2 of a 2-week series with members of the Coeur d'Alene tribe. Last week we were privileged to have Chairman Chief Allen as our guest, and this week we welcome to our program Quanah Spencer, who is the Legislative Director for the Coeur d'Alene tribe. And really the topic we want to deal with today is the whole concept of lobbyists. There's been a lot of discussion about lobbyists in recent months and years. And our distinguished guest is an attorney. He got his law degree from the University of Colorado as well as his undergraduate degree. And he has had experience for some years serving in Washington, D.C. as a lobbyist, and now is headquartered here in Idaho with the Coeur d'Alene tribe, and he continues that very successful career with the tribe, both with the United States government and the state of Idaho. Quanah is a real good friend. I've really appreciated knowing him and working with him since his arrival at the Coeur d'Alene tribe. Quanah, welcome to the program. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
And I'm so pleased to have our 2 regular panelists. First of all, Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho. And next to her is Erna Reinhardt, who's Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College. And Janelle will commence today's questioning.
Quanah, welcome to the program today. It's going to be interesting to talk about lobbying. What is lobbying and what do lobbyists do? I think we all kind of knows it when we sees it, but it's one of those things that we may not have a good definition. So what is lobbying and what do lobbyists do?
Well, I think lobbying is actually being an advocate, both at the state and federal, and even sometimes the local level, where you put forth either your clients or your own interest before legislators. They make the laws, and we're governed by them. So I think being able to be part of the process at the formative stages is very important. So the role of the lobbyist is to facilitate that process of being an informed advocate. The lobbyists themselves is just that, an informed advocate. I have to make sure that I'm informed on all issues, and if there's something that I don't know, then I have to make sure that I become educated and up to speed on the issue enough to relate it to folks that may not know as much about the topic as I might at the time. And then we advocate. We're supreme advocates of our client's position, and we try to relay that to folks so that when we're working relationships, it's cooperative from the start. Sometimes you may end up in an adversarial situation, but I always like to say that we never agree to disagree. We always agree on different issues. So that's the way I like to always phrase it.
It's a real interesting way. Erna Reinhardt.
Welcome to the show, Quanah. Share with our viewers what are some of the strategies that you use as a lobbyist. You talked about it a little bit, but what kind of skills are necessary for a good lobbyist, and then how do you do your job? Do you do a lot of it on the phone? Do you do it in personal visits? What makes a good lobbyist?
Well, I think first and foremost, something that makes a good lobbyist is somebody that's curious and somebody that wants to listen. You have to be curious enough to go out and actually listen to somebody else's viewpoint and not discount it right off the bat. If you ever go into a situation where you've already got your mind made up, then there's probably no reason for you to be a lobbyist. You've got to be able to at least understand and respect the other person's point of view. And what you're able to do at that point, at least what I do, is I listen to some of their concerns and I listen to some of their issues, and I find the different pieces of it that we may or may not support, and I really analyze it to see what it is that they're talking about. For instance, this year, the state of Idaho created an Office of Indian Education. Mr. Luna did the state superintendent. And in the past, it was not a situation where the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee wanted to fund that position, although the governors in the past had included it as part of their budget. Well, we talked to Mr. Luna early in his campaign, and we actually found some common ground there. We actually found common ground, and it was the overall success of the students in the K through 12 subject areas. And we worked with him and his staff during the campaign formation, actually created the position, and he followed up with his campaign pledge to create that office. And in fact, we got the guarantee last week that he in fact would do that, and it was because we actually sat down and listened to some of his concerns, and he listened to ours, and we worked out common ground. We came together and we got the job done. And so it's really that simple sometimes. And that goes to the second part of your question, which is personal relationships and sitting down one-on-one do wonders for all kinds of issues. A phone call is great. Phone call's good, email's good. I do all of those things. But really, when it comes down to it, it's as simple as a handshake or even a cup of coffee, and you're able to come to an agreement on some issues. And so those are key to my job.
One of the things I think that is often not understood is that how much of the work is done way in the preliminary phase in terms of even drafting bills or, like you were saying with Mr. Luna, working on some of these issues way before they even get farther down the road. So you gave one example. Is that something that you do on a regular basis?
I'm always reading the newspapers, and I'm always reading any kind of legislative information that comes out from the state and federal areas. Sometimes it could be as simple as a statement that a senator says in the paper, and it gives you an idea of what some of their priorities are going to be and what their thought processes are going to be. With the election of the new Congress in the 110th, we had to fundamentally shift our thinking from some of the priorities that were with the Republican Party to now some of the priorities that are with the Democratic Party, since they are theoretically what they say is the party in charge. But the great thing about working for the Coeur d'Alene Tribe is that they're issue-based, candidate-specific, which means each candidate has their own set of issues and their own set of priorities. And we focus based upon how that candidate stands on certain issues as opposed to whether they're a Democrat, Republican, or an independent. We really choose to work on issue-based candidates. So it's great. We're nonpartisan that way. It makes my job a lot easier. But the great thing about the Coeur d'Alene Tribe also is that the members of the council, along with the chairman, are actually so active in the process that sometimes I kind of become a fly on the wall as they talk through the issues directly with the people that are making the decisions. I mean, it comes down to sometimes where it's governor talking directly to the chairman, and I merely stand off to the side and take notes so that I remember exactly what was said during the discussion. So it's a wonderful job. I'm having a great time doing it.
Good.
Now, let's talk about some of your agenda. I showed it last week when Chief Allen was here, but this is this year's Coeur d'Alene Tribe Legislative Focus, and actually it's your agenda, and I will show this again to the viewers. It's really, really well done, and so literature is also important in this process. Would you share with the viewers, and we're taping this here in January 2007, it'll air in March, but the session will be in Idaho, will be a long ways on that process. Once the tribal council's made some decisions, what are some of the most key issues that you're dealing with now, both at the national and state level?
Well, I think first off, and I think Chairman Allen probably alluded to this when he went through his discussion, is economic development and diversification of that economic portfolio, so that we get away from jobs that are based strictly on service industry jobs, which sometimes they're minimum wage. What the Coeur d'Alene Tribe has directed me to do in my activities is to focus on economic policy that creates jobs that are higher than minimum wage and that provide an actual source of technical and or professional education as a part of the career environment. They want to make sure that those folks that decide to work in the tribe's businesses, which right now they acquired 2 new ones, Berg Integrated Systems, which is located in Plummer, and Hearthbread Bakehouse, which is located in Spokane, Washington, but they want to relocate it out here to Idaho at some point. They've told me to focus on these businesses and focus on really trying to get folks trained up, so that if they decide to ever leave employment with those businesses, they have a marketable skill that they can take on to another employer, so that their multiplier effect goes and exceeds what our businesses are able to provide them at that time. It's really personal and professional job growth.
Yes, Janelle Burke.
What are some of the differences between lobbying at the local level, lobbying at the state level, and lobbying at the federal level? What are some of the differences that you observe? Or
Well,
are they the same?
Well, I think really to a certain extent they are really the same. It comes down to personal relationships that you share with the legislators. And it's a level of trust that's built through interaction with each other and working on issues. Sometimes there are issues that you may not agree on at first glance, but once you really tear apart the issue and get to the meat of the arguments, both for and against, you actually start to build some rapport and respect with legislators. And it's really good to see that progression from where you first start out together working on an issue where you're kind of new to it, both parties are, and you really become more and more educated on it, and towards a certain point you kind of see this like symbiosis where you kind of reach this level where we actually may not disagree on anything here, we might actually become partners and work together and move forward. So that's the basics behind both the federal, state, and local levels. The only difference I see happening on the federal level is oftentimes it's a real slow process, and it's inherent in our Constitution with the way that Congress works. The House of Representatives is supposed to be a more population-centric part of the House. That's why they call it. It's supposed to represent the population more, and they're only elected to 2 terms, so that's supposed to make them closer to the people. Whereas on the Senate side, you've got senators elected to 6-year terms, and it's supposed to be a more deliberative process on the Senate side. So you've got a real disconnect sometimes in Congress between what happens on the House of Representatives side and on the Senate side, and it can get slowed down in the Senate. So you may put a lot of time and effort into a bill in the House of Representatives side, and it gets to the Senate, and it languishes and eventually dies because it doesn't get passed to the president for signature. On the state level, a lot of the times it goes faster. The pace is a little faster. They're still as deliberative, but sometimes the pace is real faster because they don't meet for as long as the federal legislature does. Here in Idaho, we have a few months where the legislature comes in, and they only have a set amount of time to get bills passed. And voters want to see, legislators get work done. They don't want to see bills languish and die without having a proper amount of hearings and a proper amount of discussion. I mean, that's how our democracy works. And so it's really kind of the same, but sometimes the pace of it is different.
Do you notice a lot of difference between rural and urban areas? There aren't many urban areas, real urban areas in Idaho, but do you notice a difference between urban and rural areas?
I do. I think some of the priorities that urban and rural areas have sometimes are different, but it's great because it adds a unique component to the state legislature here in Idaho, because you have differing viewpoints. Because it just wouldn't be any fun if everybody thought the same, and believed the same.
So unless they felt like us.
Right. But one of the things that we've actually done at the Coeur d'Alene Tribe is we've gone down there with more of a North Idaho focus to our efforts down there. And what we've tried to do is really elevate North Idaho, because the tribe, is a huge neighbor here. And without our success and without North Idaho's success moving forward, none of us move forward. I mean, we're stronger together than we are apart. And so we really go down there and advocate for a more North Idaho basis. The college is a huge part of our lobbying efforts. We've got some workforce technology programs and professional programs that we would like to see funded at a large level down up here, because our businesses are tying into that. Berg Integrated Systems, our growth potential for that is unlimited. In the first month of this year, we made as much money as 6 months of last year. We doubled our workforce in about a 2-month period. Now, if we continue on that pace, we're going to need an educated workforce. We're going to need people that really want to work for us. And the tribe's a great employer. They're great to work for. So we're going to be looking for North Idaho College to help us. And what better way than when they go down to Boise, we lend our efforts to some of their efforts.
I have to intervene to say we're grateful. For our viewers who don't know, the chairman, Chief Allen, just wrote a letter to our president supporting our funding, and we do have a large program in workforce training. I think some of them counted more than once, but over 10,000 people go through the workforce training in a year. And then we have our professional technical programs as well as our academic programs. And I also want to say publicly to you that we also believe deeply in local control, and you do too, and because you move faster, you can work on these things together. With that, Erna Reinhardt.
Kwani, you touched a little bit on the 4 items that you referenced directly in your legislative platform. You mentioned 2 of them already, economic development and education, but I just want to give you this opportunity to touch on, if you'd like. Your other 2 items are telecommunications and public safety. Share with us what your vision is on those 2 areas.
Well, I think under telecommunications, it's net neutrality. There's an actual debate going on right now at the federal level, and there's a debate whether people actually have to start paying for access to the internet, and who owns the internet and who controls it. Is it something that's going to be free so that all folks can go in and tap into this resource, which is a huge resource, and it's not available to everybody in the United States right now. It wasn't actually available to most of the residents of the reservation, whether they be native or non-native, until just about a year and a half ago, when the tribe's telecom department actually put up broadband services. And now that's free to folks to hook up to tie into the internet. And so we favor at the tribe a net neutrality, which is nobody owns or controls the internet. It's something that's there as a really a public resource that, I think with the advent of some of these blogs that you see, private individuals are actually feeling now like they might have a tool to become part of the process. And it's going to be interesting to see how do you really kind of control that and shape that participation by regular citizenry in commenting on things of public concern. So we favor net neutrality. In regards to our public safety and our law enforcement, as you folks probably know, there's a huge methamphetamine epidemic, and a lot of the times it does affect rural communities to a greater extent than people really are able to discern right now. The DEA really hasn't focused a lot of efforts on this, neither has the Department of Justice in general, to prosecute these crimes, because in the past, there were small amounts of methamphetamine that were found. Well, now with the advent of these large mega labs that create pounds of methamphetamine, it's really gone big time in the drug world. And we're seeing folks coming into and out of jurisdictions, the criminal element coming into and out of jurisdictions, selling a product and leaving and going to another jurisdiction. The methamphetamine epidemic does not respect political, cultural, or racial boundaries like we may as human beings. It doesn't recognize that. It doesn't respect it. So what the Coeur d'Alene tribe has done is they've entered into cross-deputization agreements so that law enforcement officers can cooperate together and really go in and combat this epidemic. It's slowly starting to really seep into a lot of different areas that we hadn't seen it before. I mean, it's affecting school children. School children are coming to school sometimes with the lingering effects of being exposed to the byproducts of meth production. They may or may not have parents that are affected by addiction. The children themselves may have tried meth once or twice and be suffering from addiction themselves. And we've got parents and other people that are contacting law enforcement because they're getting arrested. And we have to do the best that we can to combat it. And it's going to take a multifaceted approach. It's going to involve social workers. It's going to involve students. It's going to involve parents. It's going to involve educators and police and healthcare folks. It's going to involve all those people. But it's also going to involve everybody, because it is a community problem. We all have to deal with it, whether we want to or not. We're going to have to make some tough choices, and we're going to have to come down on this methamphetamine epidemic. Otherwise, it's going to take over some of our areas, and we're not going to recognize them anymore.
In talking with an attorney with a different tribe some years ago, she indicated to me that with all the many tribes in America, and they're each one set up somewhat different in their structure of governance and their relationship even to the U.S. government based on agreements or treaties or whatever. And she said there's no expert on all Indian law in the country. I'm leading something with this. As a lobbyist has lobbied both in Washington, D.C. in the past and I guess full-time and now here, and you have that's part of your responsibility. Talk to us a little bit about the role of national organizations representing tribes across America in the arena of how do we walk through this very legal system of the role of the national government and the role of tribes and the sovereignty of tribes. And what kind of recommendations do you have? What are we needing to do that we're not doing for this system?
Well, I think the role of that national organizations can play really is an informative one. They can get information out to the tribes that need it, and really a lot of non-natives have questions and go to these national organizations to seek answers to basic questions about Indians and Indian tribes. They can play a very good role in informing the public. But I think what they also can do is they can seek to build some type of a consensus amongst the 562 federally recognized tribes around the nation. And even with all this diversity, there's still only about maybe a 1.2% American Indians nationwide, so we don't compose a large part of the population. And sometimes what happens is that our vote and our issues get diluted because we are such a small minority. But we have most of the land base in the United States. We hold about, I think it's about 25% of natural gas and oil within the United States are contained within federal and Indian lands. And so being able to be an advocate at the national level to really inform tribes of what's going on, and in some cases even building consensus to get behind particular pieces of legislation, or likewise to kill particular pieces of legislation, is very important for some of these organizations to do. What sometimes we have to balance out, though, is the message that these national organizations give to some of these legislators that may or may not be the message that comes from the individual tribes themselves. They may disagree with the national organization at sometimes, at some points. But I think really what the government doesn't do is a lot of the times it doesn't do a good job of recognizing the role of tribes in the system. The Indian tribes are only mentioned twice in the U.S. Constitution. And the one that's usually cited most times is where Congress gets its plenary power, and it's because this is what they call the Indian Commerce Clause. And so I think just that fact that we're only mentioned twice, and it's really sometimes in passing, is a real key to understanding the disconnect between national and tribal governments. What my role a lot of the times is to try to bridge that gap, provide information, and provide a source of feedback to our legislators so that they understand, you know, if they decide to sponsor this bill, what are the practical implications for the Indian tribe which is in their district. And so that's what we try to hope to do.
One final question on this, as someone who teaches in the field of political science, it's very key to you, as it is any other interest, the committee system, and you know, things many times die in committee. There are thousands of bills introduced in the Congress of the United States, and a great majority of them don't get out of committee. And the chair of the committee is important. So tell us a little bit about, from time to time, I assume you have to work differently depending on the composition of the committee and who chairs the committee. Chair of committees are very powerful.
Yes, they are. And also, they actually set the agenda,
Yes.
And they set the witness list. And so you have to make sure that you're able to work not only with the staff from that particular chair, but also the committee staff themselves.
And a committee chair can hold a bill.
Exactly. And actually, last year, it was like a 2-year-long effort. We tried to get legislation passed that would have settled the Cobell litigation, which is probably the largest class action lawsuit in U.S. history. We tried to get a bill that would have settled that for around $8 billion is what they were kicking around. And it would have been the largest settlement in U.S. history. It's not a reparation. What it is it's a compensation, paying back people's money that the government failed to account for. It would have been the same situation as if you went to a bank, invested your money, and after a 20-year time period you wanted to take it out. Well, you would expect that you'd get a statement showing deposits and withdrawals for the 20-year time period. Well, that happened with Indian tribes and individual Indians. The government can't account for this. And we're in a situation where if they can't account for it, then what do they owe? What do they owe back to these tribal people? Because it's their money. And so we got to the point where we actually got it introduced. And it went through the first committee, which is the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, and it languished in the committee for about 2 years, and we had several hearings where we actually talked about how do we reform this bill so that we try to make as many people happy as possible. You never make everybody happy, but you can try. And we tried, and we put together a really big effort to try to get it done. And unfortunately, it languished in the 109th Congress, and nothing happened on it, so it died. And we're currently looking at trying to introduce it this year in the new Senate Committee on Indian Affairs that has new leadership. But again, because that committee has almost an equal number of senators from both the Republican and Democratic side, most of their legislation has to be bipartisan in order to make it out of that committee. And so we really have to work together with everybody to try to get everybody's concerns addressed before we get it out of that committee.
It doesn't hurt if the chair is helping push it.
Exactly. And we have to really tip our hats to Senator Dorgan, and Senator McCain in the last Congress, they really did work together to try to get it pushed out of the committee. And Senator Crapo's staff, who sat on the Indian Affairs Committee last Congress, was very, very key in getting some of the recommendations that we had from the Coeur d'Alene tribe communicated to members of the committee. And so they did a great job working hand in hand with us. I mean, I spent probably every day on the phone with one of Senator Crapo's staff over like a 2-week period trying to iron out details before it got presented to the committee. So
that's a role of lobbyist.
It is. It is.
Janelle Burke.
Well, you must have authority from someone to decide what issues you're going to pursue. You can't just go out there and decide on your own, I take it, what you want to support and what you want to oppose. So how do you get that authority?
Well, I sit down and I talk to the chairman.
Of the Coeur d'Alene tribe?
Yes, Chairman Chief Allen of the Coeur d'Alene tribe. And I sit down and I ask him directly what some of his priorities are going to be from month to month and year to year. I look long-term down the road, and then I ask about short-term, some short-term priorities that I should be focusing on. And once I'm told what I need to focus on, then it's my job to go and make sure that it does get done. And I try to immerse myself into this subject matter as much as I can. And that's the great thing about my job is I get a chance to know a little bit about everything, and I rely upon the staff that are really the experts doing the work every day to assist me, and they've done a great job doing it, and I couldn't do it without them. But it gives me an opportunity to really meet some people too, and really kind of learn their story behind some of the legislation sometimes that gets passed, and it's great.
We have to also recognize your legislative assistant, Margaret Sijon. She's a tremendous help in this process.
She is.
And it takes as Chairman Chief Allen said last week, it takes a staff that's really there working every day to make all this happen. On behalf of our panel and our staff, Quanah Spencer, the Legislative Director of the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, we thank you for being here. It's been really informative. Last week we enjoyed Chairman Chief Allen, and good luck in your work. And we'll have an open invitation to you, as we did him, for coming back and reporting to people. And this program does air over a very large area, and so we're delighted to give you this opportunity. And again, good luck in all your work.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, our guest has been Quanah Spencer, the Legislative Director of the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, working on both national and state and even local issues. And we've covered a lot of area, not only what does a lobbyist do, but what's the priority of this particular lobbyist and organization. We hope you'll be with us again next week at this same time when we'll move to yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.